Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce's Ukraine War News Update for the 14th of August 2023. Hopefully, the first part thereof. I am doing two at the moment due to consistent restrictions and whatnot. I did get up at the crack of dawn to do this. We're due out to Heraklion today, which should be quite exciting. Anyway, let's get to where I usually start. The general staff figures, Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. 530 KIA, 8 tanks, 19 armoured personnel vehicles. So KIAs are pretty average for what we have been seeing over the last few months. There's been a couple of days of spikes and a few days of lower than that, so that sits fairly much in the middle. 8 tanks is obviously going to be a bit of a loss to the Russians, but not the worst day. But still, you're losing 8 tanks a day, you're in trouble. 19 APVs. I mean, this is things like infantry fighting vehicles, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles, and armored personnel carriers. So they have lost a huge number yesterday, and I think there's been a few areas that have been pretty hot on the front line, Uruzhani being one of them, Robotna being another, where I think the Russians have had taken quite some losses. And then we get on to artillery systems, and it's jumped back up 27. I mean, previously it was in the sort of 19 area, late teens, which is bad enough, but 27 is a significant day of losses for the Russians in this category. One multiple launch rocket system, 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems. Over the last week, they have lost a number of air defense systems, and that must be pretty worrying for the Russians. So, yeah, I think this is a pretty heavy day of losses for them. 9 drones. Don't know whether that is from last night or the night before. It depends what the cutoff point is and when the drones are sent. 19 vehicles and fuel tanks, which is a high loss. These are often things like the cankers, these loaf vehicles, Scooby-Doo vans, but lots of other vehicles as well can be included in that, and fuel tanks, so on and so forth. 6 pieces of special equipment is another heavy day there. You can see that the average is getting closer and closer to 2 a day. So at the moment it's less than 2 a day lost in pieces of special equipment a day, where 6 are lost is a bad day for the Russians, obviously. So intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance equipment. Could be like camera outposts and whatnot, fixed onto pylons or in any number of places, but it could be electronic warfare, could be deminers and excavators, lots of things included there. Anyway, that's the daily losses just come out, so I was waiting for this to come out to get that to you. Andrew Perpetua, we missed his yesterday, he did it a bit later than normal. This was his yesterday one, which was slightly top heavy for the Russian equipment lost. You can see some electronic warfare and surveillance stuff there. Ukraine's lost a radar piece of radar equipment as well, so it does go both ways, of course. Air defense system, a URL so that's a truck with an autocannon on the back. We saw that hit, I think, just south of Uruzhani, actually. So that's a low value air defense system. But I think there were several lost yesterday, so he hasn't got them all there. And then today's numbers, fairly similar ratio. As you can see, 3 surveillance and comms. So this goes back to the special equipment there. We have comms equipment taken out, and he links all of these as well. So if you go over to Andrew Perpetua, check out his stuff. You can find all the links on his Twitter feed, I'm sure. And then, a lot of trucks. So the Ukrainians are aiming for their logistics, the Russian logistics. However, you get down to the Ukrainian list, and we have a number of artillery systems taken out. So we have a Pion there. It's quite a big gun. Grodzvik. Some of these are older bits of kit, D20, and then M109, Western provided. So the Ukrainians do lose, obviously, equipment as well, but it's just the ratios. Are the Russians losing more? Right, to go on to other hits and losses, I mean, there's this story which is pretty, I won't dwell on that image, pretty horrific. I know these are kind of anecdotal, but a few of these recently have been fairly poignant. Russia shelled the town of Shiroko in Kherson and killed an entire family this morning. A married couple, 23-year-old baby, their daughter all died. 12-year-old son is in critical condition. No, he's actually died in hospital. And this is pretty terrible. Yeah, local family all wiped out in one fell swoop, and that is what the Russians do. They seem to have fairly indiscriminate shelling of places in Kherson, and yeah, we have the loss of a family. Okay, so moving on, a garbage dump is on fire in Mariupol. I don't know how and why this is. This is a kind of Russia on fire, but the occupied territories of Ukraine. Whether this is sabotage, whether this is just Russian smoke around a corner type thing, or being hit with something from the Ukrainians, I don't know. And then this. So I think, well, I'll read it first. So Ukrainians use night vision devices on their FPV drones. So those are first-person view drones. They're the racing drones that you see the camera pointing in the direction it's flying rather than pointing downwards from the drone, and those ones dropped IEDs. So this is significant because previously we've seen thermal optics and night vision and whatnot on the drones that drop IEDs. So there's a few of them have been used at night, but we haven't heard of FPV drones. It must be quite difficult to fly those at night, I think. And now we're starting to see them striking Russian vehicles in the Zaporizhia area. This should accelerate the pace of the counteroffensive by limiting Russian movements in the area of interest. This thread, P-Style 1, this source says, looks forward to the videos. These are some Russian sources saying in the Zaporizhia direction, the use of kamikaze drones with thermal images or night vision devices by the enemy was noticed. The attacked vehicle and they attack vehicles and equipment while driving at night. Be careful. And if you hear them in the daytime, you can still have time to react and understand where it is flying from visually, and instantly make a decision. If the personnel is on armor, where to jump to reduce the possibility of hitting personnel. Then at night, he will only be heard. On the other hand, you can make a bunch of false targets and confuse the enemy. The idea is that it's slightly easier to get away from them in the daytime because at least you have a chance of getting a visual on the drone and jump away from the target if needs be. But at night time, you have no idea where they're coming from. So that's a slight worry. And sticking on drones, here we have a first-person view drone destroying that Zu-23-2 based on a truck. So this is that air defense system that we saw saw on the list here. Air defense system, where was it? Or was it the day before? Air defense, this one, the truck with that on the back. Actually, this is the, I've lost it. Here it is. This is the footage of that being blown up by a first-person view drone. And why I've included that, not only because it tallies with the list, but also where it's taken place. So this is the village just to the south of Uruzhani, which is, right next to it pretty much. So we saw some footage yesterday, or I referenced some footage of cluster munitions taking out retreating Russian soldiers from the very southern tip of Uruzhani, and they were running pretty much into Zavitny. I mean, it is very close, less than a kilometer, or about a kilometer from the very southern building of Uruzhani to Zavitny. So it is significant that the Ukrainians are targeting things in Zavitny because it means that will be the next to fall or to be liberated by the Ukrainians. And if they continue their momentum, we could see a number of places taken in the next week in that sector. Another attempt to set fire to a military enlistment office in Russia. 45-year-old man from Polevsky in Sverdlovsk threw a Molotov cocktail at the door of the building. The fire was quickly extinguished and he was arrested. But there is this continued pushback against enlistment and conscription and essentially the war. And then finally, for this section, Russia on fire, big blaze at Ramenskoye in Moscow region. It's at the premises of Lama Pro, which sells fertilizers, among other things. Plastic pellets are said to be fueling the fire, causing the dense black smoke. Safety violations blamed, which means someone was smoking, says Tim White. So another significant fire. These fires, they aren't little fires. These are significant examples of very poor health and safety, at the very least. Right, moving on to strikes. Overnight, Russia attacked Ukraine. Air defense managed to shoot down all targets, apparently. I'm not 100% sure this is the case. Well, Tim White sort of uh, illustrates his skepticism in a second. So 15 out of 15 Shahed drones were taken out, 8 out of 8 caliber cruise missiles. Falling debris caused a fire and some damage at several locations in Odessa. Also, one helicopter of an unknown type was shot down near Bakhmut. So that's the first time I've heard about that. So Bakhmut area, helicopter taken out, and that looks like the shape of it. I mean, they say unknown, but they're giving the shape of a K-52. It might not be at all. An explosion occurred in the Russian city of Belgrade, according to local residents. So Belgrade has been hit with something. Melitopol's been hit. Explosions reported there. Ukrainian journalists identify Russian officers involved in the July strikes in Odessa. So we're just about to see some evidence of what happened in Odessa last night. And of course, what this means is that no one can escape the horrors they perpetrate. So we have, and it's not the first time this has been done as well, but we have Ukrainian journalists identified Russian commanders allegedly involved in the P-800 Onyx missile strikes on Odessa on July the 19th and 23rd, damaging the city's UNESCO heritage sites. Remember, I showed you footage of that, also taking out grain storage and so on and so forth, pretty much obvious war crimes. And the Ukrainian journalists have done some digging and know those who took part in firing those missiles, guiding those missiles, so on and so forth. Bellingcat has helped, I think, previously, and other open source intelligence networks to identify the people behind some of these strikes. So that's significant. When the Hague war crime court cases turn up, we might see some of those people lined up, or at least, if they ever set foot out of Russia. Anyway, Zaporizhia, explosions from S-300 missiles have been evidenced there. Zaporizhia is often hit by S-300s. There are S-300 missile launchers in the region that I've often thought they should be target number one, as they do pepper Zaporizhia with those surface-to-air missiles that are used in the surface-to-surface mode, but are unfortunately somewhat inaccurate in so doing. So this is now going to Odessa. So Tim White says, Odessa was hit by Russia last night and hit hard. Local officials say air defense caught everything, but there are still 2 big fires from falling debris. 3 people injured in the supermarket when it struck and was engulfed in flames. Looking at the speed and scale of the fire in Odessa, it doesn't look like just fragments, and I would be skeptical if it was the other way round. So in other words, if Russia were claiming this, he would say, yeah, I think it's probably direct hits. For the record, Ukrainian says 15 attack drones and 8 cruise missiles were intercepted. I don't know. It could be. I mean, the problem is, if you say this was a missile hitting, then, well, you've got 2 options. Either the Russians hit this place on purpose. Well, you've got 3 options. Either Russians hit this place on purpose, or they hit it accidentally directly with a missile, or the missile was somewhat intact but was hit by air defense systems or missiles, and it was sent off course or came down but exploded rather than was exploded in the air and then debris fell down. So there are those options that could explain these heavy fires. I mean, this is the supermarket that's burning, and it's looking like a pretty major fire going on there. Anyway, that's Odessa, so it has been hit fairly hard last night by the Russians. We'll move on to other bits and pieces now. This is Defamon talking about how, well, giving reference to some Russian discussion about how morale is low. Russian telegrams are not pleased with the interview of Major Tomov. So Major Tomov is the Russian major that was captured near Kazachi Lahiri and was then seen on video yesterday, and I showed that to you. Being, well, not quite being interviewed. He's with a map pointing out targets that the Ukrainians could hit that are Russian targets, and then talking about how basically, the war should be over, etc., etc. And the Russians that have seen that video are not very happy. I saw the video of Tomov's interrogation. I won't upload it here. It would be better if he effed himself with a grenade, honestly. So they're not particularly happy with that, which I guess you can imagine. No one likes seeing their own side's majors being captured and then spilling the beans. Anyway, pro-war bloggers see Ukrainians' gains as proof of flagging Russian morale. One author claimed that Russian soldiers prematurely withdrew from Uruzhany because the unit's personnel were drunk, the ISW reported. So this is Kiev Independent, drawing from the ISW here. Just talking, I'll go through just a little bit of it at the beginning. Pro-war bloggers are complaining of poor Russian morale and personnel failures after Ukrainian troops made gains in Uruzhany. Criticisms of Russian brigades in Donetsk arose after Ukrainian forces advanced in the area of Uruzhany, and one author claimed that Russian soldiers prematurely withdrew because the unit's personnel were drunk. While some objected to this characterization, other voices in the Russian information space echoed and expanded these complaints, according to the ISW. One author attributed Russian defensive failures on the front to the dismissal of a unit commander, Major General Ivan Popov, so that is still hurting the Russians. The bloggers, quote, targeted their complaints at the personnel of these units rather than the unit or theatre commanders, suggesting that Popov's removal and other rumoured command purges may have removed mid-level Russian military commanders as a readily available scapegoat for Russian military failures. So, yeah, the claim here is Russia, except the Khodorkovsky, who leads a battalion near Uruzhany, so that's the Vostok battalion, acknowledged on August the 13th that Russia expended its resources too early in the war. That is a hugely revealing statement. Just that little sentence there tells us an awful lot. It means that they don't have the reserves. Just what I've been saying over the last week or so. Khodorkovsky is pretty much, reading between the lines here, saying that, hey, they don't have the reserves to be able to defend effectively because they're expended too early in the war. Think about Bakhmut. And this is, I would agree with Anders Puck Nielsen, had a little, not a pop at Michael Kaufman. Kaufman's quite critical. He's a good analyst in many respects, but he's not one to change his mind much. And he's always been fairly critical about what happened in Bakhmut and said it was a wrong decision of Zelensky to keep defending Bakhmut. I personally think it was the right decision, and I've said that over and over. And actually, it's interesting that Anders Puck Nielsen, who someone I really rate, also believes the same and critiqued Kaufman's position on that in one of his recent videos, which is well worth watching. It's only a short one. So I think Bakhmut was an example of Russia expending its resources in the war. You can say too early. I would say expending their resources needlessly there. Anyway, friendly fire here. So this is a video, and we've seen the outcome. I didn't show you the video because it was inappropriate, but you've seen the outcome of a supposed fight between. Or a shootout between Kadyrovites and Russian conventional soldiers that ended up with a number dead and a number wounded. Now there are reports and a video clip of a mass fight between Russia's invading soldiers. This happened right on Central Beach outside the Santa Barbara Cafe in occupied Mariupol. Sadly, the video cuts off. It's about to get interesting. My guess is Chechen and Russian clashes there. So again, get your popcorn and watch the discord going on amongst the Russian ranks. Now, this is an article that's been spread about quite a bit. It's a Guardian article talking about the issues with mining. How does this compare to historical minefields? Well, quote, in an urgent appeal to allies, Alexei Reznikov told The Guardian his soldiers were unearthing 5 mines for every square meter in places. This is basically saying it's the most heavily mined country on earth now, Ukraine, critically short of sappers and equipment to clear the front lines. This would be one I'd love to dip into at greater length. I'm in a bit of a time squeeze at the moment, so I won't go through much of it, but go and check it out. It is giving you a sense of how challenging it is for Ukrainians, both in terms of manpower and the sheer scale of the job, the challenge they're up against. Anyway, thanks for watching the first part of the news piece today. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you shortly for the second part.